Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This is my first episode discussing COVID-19 and how its arrival has impacted one of many communities within the art world. I interview Nico Wheadon, the Executive Director of NXTHVN, a multidisciplinary arts incubator located in New Haven, Connecticut. The nonprofit nurtures rising artists through its fellowship programs and offers talented teens from the local high schools paid apprenticeships. Nico and the NXTHVN team plays a very important role in many people's lives, and it is for that reason I invited Nico on my podcast during the invasion of this virus. She's dynamic, multifaceted, and generous with her intellect. She will share with us her passion and how NXTHVN is helping artists and others survive this difficult time. Thank you and enjoy. Nico, thank you so much for joining me on my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I really felt it was a very important time for us to hear your voice, not only because you run an unbelievable organization as it pertains to supporting artists and those in the local community, but also because in many ways you're a first responder for a lot of the artists that you're connected to. But before we start to talk about NXTHVN, I would like for you to share with us, tell us about yourself. At what point did you discover your passion? And I'm really curious about your choice of your studies. I mean, you studied arts, symbiotics, and creative and cultural entrepreneurship. Tell us about, first of all, why you made those choices, and second, what exactly did you learn?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. This is my very first podcast experience, so I'm excited to be sharing that with you. And so I think, there's a couple of things that I'd probably disclaim first as a way of getting to know me and understanding why I advocate for art and artists. And so I think, first and foremost, I identify as an artist. I arrive at advocating for art because I know from my personal experience, the power of art to really transform individuals, but also in turn their communities. And so I think, there's many kind of examples in my life I can point to for how art has transformed me and my family by opening up, new ways of seeing and observing and translating the world that we share. But I think it's also it's like the lens through which I build community. And so, I'm married to a chemist, but many people always ask, they say, "Oh, is Malik an artist?" And I say, "Well, no, but he's an artist who's looking for his medium." And so I think when I look at the people that surround me in both my work and in my daily life, I'm surrounded by creatives and creative problem solvers. And so I think kind of within that, it's been, my preference, and this comes in part from who I am and how I self-identify is, advocating for artists of color, women writers, LGBTQI makers. And I think, that's an important thing to say up front because, I think that especially when we get to talking about COVID and how the kind of new ecosystem that we're sharing is impacted disproportionately, among people of color. I think those are really important distinctions to make up front. And so in terms of my studies, I also disclaim that like I didn't ever study art history. At this point in my life, I'm 36. I'm kind of proud of it. And I think, again, most of that choice was wrapped up in not feeling like, the communities that I identify with were represented in that kind of dominant narrative. And so, I studied art theory, and I chose that as a choice predominantly because, theory applies pretty broadly. But it's also like totally useless if not applied within a context, and if not applied as a practice. So yeah, I decided to study at Brown University because, of the open curriculum, but also that to me, in my kind of, search for a place to land, it felt like the most true liberal arts education I could find. And so, I was really fortunate to kind of find my mentors and advisors almost immediately. I think you could declare sophomore year, but I declared freshman year. And it's because I'd met Marlene Malik and John Mayer, who really kind of emboldened me to like take my creativity to new depths, but also to think about it as something that needs to be communicated outwardly. And so, I think, when I look at my path and I look at how I got here, I think I have to at least honor and acknowledge my parents. My mom is a photographer and a writer. My dad is engineer, and by extension, like a problem solver. So I think that, those kind of modes of like translating what could be an aesthetic sensibility into, concrete kind of actionable ideas. It's like totally inscribed in my DNA. And so I feel fortunate to have that as kind of my context through which I, found myself and found art and found the communities that I care about.
Yeah, you are and were fortunate, but you also have to give yourself credit for listening to people and taking their advice. So in addition to being brilliant, you are also an assistant professor, an independent writer. You're publishing your first manuscript next year. And you're the executive director of NXTHVN. So how do you do it all? How do you connect the dots? It's a handful.
I know. So I'd say that at one point in time, the dots were certainly easier to connect. So, I come to NXTHVN from working at the Studio Museum on and off for about a decade. So that's like the majority of my professional career. And so when I started teaching, I was working at the Studio Museum as head of public programs and community engagement. I was living in Harlem. I walked to work. I was teaching at Barnard, which is right down the street.
Right.
And the course that I was teaching was inspired by Freestyle, which is a 2001 exhibition from the Studio Museum. I was teaching it in collaboration with an artist and friend, Leslie Hewitt, that I met at the Studio Museum. So all of those kind of connections were very present in the ecosystem of Harlem. And, all of the work was lending itself to each other. The students in my course came and did a mini residency at the Studio Museum, which, was like a really awesome way to kind of subvert the traditional classroom model. And so I think when I think back about that time and how it kind of lent itself to me taking on this new task of writing a book, the whole thing was wrapped up in experimentation. So it was, institutions like Barnard and the Studio Museum learning from artists, artists learning from our students, and then, the students kind of really learning from the community in which their higher education is cited. So not just relying on books, but like getting out of the classroom, going down the street and going to these amazing cultural institutions that create the history that people study. And so the book was, and is truly like an extension of that work and those relationships. And so I think for me, it's an opportunity to celebrate my collaborators, my peers, and kind of museum work, and like radical museum work. And it's published by the American Alliance of Museums. So I say all that to say it's a lot of context, but I think it's important because, at one point in time, those felt super anchored to Harlem and to the kind of communities that I was working within and exploring there. And since coming to NXTHVN, I've really been encouraged and invited to kind of expand my thinking a bit more globally. So, being excited by the mission of the Studio Museum and how that opened all of this up for me as like the genesis of, all these different projects of teaching, of writing, and thinking about how that applies in a more universal context. And so I think this, but, I met Titus at the Studio Museum, like 2007, when we were both kind of at the beginning of our careers, him as a artist in residence, me as a curator. And so I think, it's really awesome for this to all come full circle and for it to all come full circle here in New Haven, with the opportunity to build an institution from scratch, with an artist that I admire and that I've kept in touch with, over the course of my career. And so, yeah, I think it's zooming out, and kind of trying to understand my practice within a broader ecosystem has been really, really awesome. And I don't know that I do it all well on any given day, but I just try and think of balance as something that I might achieve, over a longer view of time. So, yeah.
Listening to you, it must have been so exciting to work with Titus to build upon this idea. It must have been so invigorating.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember the first time he called me to tell me about the project, and like people that know Titus know that he's curious. He's like an inquisitive learner. And so he was really at first calling just to catch up and to ask me questions about, what I was looking forward to. Because I think that's, the future is like a thing that we forget about sometimes when we're so bogged down in the day-to-day practice of, just like getting by and like following through on our commitments. And so I think it felt like a really awesome invitation to dream in a way that I hadn't been doing, just because of the ways in which, I was kind of under-resourced at the museum for a bit, just because, we're the newest department, we're the smallest department. And it took a while to like build that and get it really up and running. And so, yeah, I think just being invited to kind of step back and think about, like, if I had a blank piece of paper, what would I build? And I told him, I was basically like, I'm interested in what artists offer, not just traditional understandings of, creative problem solving and how artists are innovators, but how we can center artists in building spaces that serve broader communities. And, I basically described NXTHVN without actually knowing what NXTHVN was. And so it kind of started like a really exciting conversation where we were talking about the roles of artists above and beyond, what they produce as art in the world. And yeah, I came up here to see like a couple of holes in the ground, and I was like, okay, all right, I see what you're doing. But it was great. And it was, I think because NXTHVN at the time, it wasn't bearing the weight of a bunch of history, it was still an idea. We're still very much under construction today. I think it felt like there's enough space for me to play a really integral role in deciding how this institution is built and how it can be built, carrying with me all the lessons that I've learned from my mentors in the world, from Thelma Golden at the Studio Museum, from Tina Campt at Barnard, now at Brown, from Courtney Martin, at DIA, now at the Yale Center for British Art. These are all amazing women of color that have equipped me with tools to feel confident in this role. Because again, this is like nothing I've ever done. It's nothing anybody on the project has ever done. And the scale of what we're building is like truly immense. And so, yeah, I feel blessed.
Yeah, what it had.
I feel blessed to be here.
Yeah. So,
still,
yes,
still
it
going.
is. It is. It's actually, it's not even midway yet. So let's share with listeners more about what NXTHVN offers. And in that, if you can share with us what your challenges are given the current environment with this virus.
Sure. So we're still working on like the elevator pitch, because the truth is we do a lot. And because we're not fully built, we're able to continue to add things to the pot that are relevant, right? And so I think part of what I've enjoyed is coming to NXTHVN in its kind of genesis, learning from the first cohort of artists that was here last year and graduated in December, and really allowing that to kind of impact the mission statement and the program as we develop it in real time. So in short, it's like we are a multidisciplinary arts incubator. We are interested in launching professional careers. The thing we don't tell a lot of people, that I'm just sharing with you because this feels like an important moment to be transparent about this, is that this is not the place that artists come that just want a studio to like squirrel away in and make beautiful work and not engage the world. We've designed this as a year-long fellowship experience because we think it's important that people be able to show up as their full selves. So people come with debt from art school. They come with trauma from art school. They come with ideas of skills that they have and ideas of skills that they want to acquire. And our professional development curriculum really connects them with professional artists, thinkers, scholars, curators in the world from whom they can learn. And so for me, it's this mentorship piece that's like the most unique, exciting aspect of what we do, which is, we invest in people to come here to have the time and space, the time of the year, a beautiful like 24/7 access, 1,000 square foot studio in which to really figure some things out professionally so that they can then take the next step in their careers. And so, yeah, it's been amazing to see the artists that invest in this process from the mentors perspective. So we've had folks like McLean Thomas and Miguel Luciano and Antoine Sargent, Carrie Schlotman, folks from Creative Capital, really taking time out of their busy schedules and practices to share from their experience some of these really essential skills. So thinking about, public speaking, thinking about grant writing, art law and taxes, like the super unsexy stuff that
Right.
No one really wants to think about, but that if you're being real about launching a career, it's like you have to at least know how those things operate and then choose not to care or not to use them, right? But it's important that we at least paint the broadest picture possible of the skills we think necessary to become a professional artist that does this thing, full time. And can like take care of yourself. And so it's that mentorship, fellowship experience. We have a high school apprenticeship, which is really, really exciting for me as someone that hadn't quite worked with young people in this way before. I've developed a lot of curriculum and worked with young folks through my work at the Studio Museum, but to really imagine what it means to expose 14, 15, 16-year-old kids to professional artists like at the top of their game, and what that means in terms of like opening up new pathways of kind of dreaming and imagining yourself in the world. It's been amazing. And so even just connecting these young people with skills they already had, but maybe weren't able to identify because of the ways that art is cut from schools and because of the ways that even within your family, depending on if you're the only one, you might not be confident articulating or sharing, your creativity out loud. And so to see these apprentices learn from our fellows and to see both cohorts learn from all the amazing visiting artists and curators that we have is to imagine a field that looks like this, because we're working predominantly with Black and Brown emerging professionals. It's amazing because it's like, I didn't have this when I was at Brown, again, this is like why I didn't study art history. This is why I was looking to alternative, institutions from which to like get my education, the Studio Museum being one. So being able to kind of honor the legacy of awesome institutions that have been out here trying to create new pathways for people, but also new visions for what it means to be a creative professional is just really awesome. So that's like who we are today. When construction comes back online, we'll have co-working space so we can think about creativity in a broader sense. So supporting local entrepreneurs and business community. We'll have a cafe. We'll have a gallery for exhibitions and programming. We'll have a black box theater. And probably most excitingly, we'll have a live work tower in the back of the facility, which is where we'll be able to host established artists for short-term stays. So thinking of like 3 to 12 months, what it would mean to have some of those amazing visiting lecturers actually sited here on our campus, making work, investing in the community, participating in like the broader culture that's here in New Haven. And like that to me is the icing on the cake, which is like, building the broader culture, I think is like the best way I can describe it.
It must be so rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. I feel really fortunate to have my offices in the fellowship wing. So, every time I go get water or answer the doorbell or get my mail, I run into artists. And so I think it keeps me honest. It reminds me of who I serve in the work, or at least, one community of folks that I serve in the work. And I think, I learned so much from those conversations and from the opportunity to build this with them, right? I think the first cohort, we're so indebted to them because they elected to be here when we were literally just an idea, like there wasn't a building really to speak of. And they applied because they were like, I believe in whatever this thing is going to become. And I think maybe what they didn't know was that they were going to be part of, authoring it with us and helping us to make some decisions that support them better. So that feels, again, like a blessing. I feel very fortunate to be here.
So share with us some of the challenges you're facing right now. I mean, in many ways, you are a first responder because a lot of artists and young people are looking to you for some guidance. Can you share with us how this virus is impacting artists?
Yeah. I mean, so I think it's super complicated, right? And I think it's nuanced for everybody individually. And so I think what I'm finding, like in a broad sense, is that there's no kind of universal impact of COVID on artists. But, I think for some, like especially those that spend a good deal of time alone in their studio already, it can kind of feel like business as usual. But I think, for others who have like a performative aspect to their practice or a social aspect to their practice, I think that, reimagining an audience and community for their work at this time is like super difficult. I don't think that Zoom can solve for some of the intimacy issues that we're all experiencing right now. And so I think in general, as a program, we're coping really well. We're staying connected with each other, through like virtual happy hours and dance parties and studio visits. Our professional development curriculum is online. So in that sense, there's no pause to what we're doing. Everyone's still at work. But, I think the undesigned moments of like intimacy and engagement with a community that, people really learn from are few and far between, right? And so I think, part of how we're trying to respond as an organization is to move up certain professional development workshops to the present. So thinking about all of the kind of emergency relief funds that are now available for individual artists, thinking that now is the time to have the grants writing workshop as opposed to the end of the year, because, these skills feel even more pressing today just based on the increase in opportunity, right? And so I think that feels like a solution. I think that acknowledging that artists of color are like some of the most impacted by this, and thinking about, the kind of connected financial and housing crises. A simple thing that we've been able to do is like fundraise to increase their stipend and to subsidize their housing, at 100% for the rest of the year. Those kind of gestures are really important in this moment, right? Because people that rely on a gig economy or on teaching or other kind of forms of supplemental income, and we acknowledge that our stipend is not a living wage, right? It's competitive, but it's not a living wage. And so yeah, in order for us to support people being in this program, we really need to invest in them in every way. So we've been fortunate to have a board that's helped us to kind of raise those funds to support them in that way. And, other kind of things like we're thinking about extending the fellowship another 5 months. So instead of them graduating in December, they graduate in May, which again is a way to ensure that they get as much support as possible during the uncertainty, hoping that some stabilization happens on the other side. But I think it's also that we don't know what the landscape of opportunity is going to look like at the end of the fellowship year either, right? And so wanting to make sure that people aren't stepping into like a desert, and so really trying to work with our partners, both locally and nationally, to see what can be done to learn from artists in this moment and to support them in the best way possible, but to do that work together. And so I think some of the most like rock star moments that I've seen in the last month have come from the high school apprentices, like some emerging artists in our program. And like in some ways they're the best equipped for this moment in terms of like just owning virtual engagements. And so, they're all working on these independent projects from their homes, using Zoom to continue being mentored by their fellows here. And just trying to stay positive and trying to share what they're making on our website, on our journal blog. And so I think, the thing that Titus has been sharing with everyone that I think is really inspirational is that, historically, like artists create some of their most amazing work in crises like this. I'm thinking back on, the election when Trump got elected, there's like some really amazing work that was being created in that time. And then, I'm not equating COVID to Trump's election by any means, but I think, there are these significant events that are undeniably impacting the world. And so I think to support our artists, both in terms of resources, but also reminding them that this is a time to go inward and to tap into the creativity that they have in spades and really, own it and to produce new work, to ask questions, to allow the work to ask questions. So I think what I'm seeing is that artists are, especially the artists we work with, are like more inspired than ever. They're more active than ever. They're in the studio, so they're still making work. They're the only ones at NXTHVN. And I think I'm excited to see what this produces. We'll have some exhibitions as soon as we're allowed to reopen. And, at that point, I think we'll be able to see with our own eyes, how artists have actually been processing this moment. So, again, I think it's complicated. I think it's nuanced. But for the most part, I think artists don't, they don't sleep on opportunities like this to really think more globally about what their work has to say.
And how you answered that question is a huge reflection on you, how much of an optimist that you are, because your answer is uplifting. It wasn't doom and gloom, which is great, especially for those, to the fact that that's how your mind thinks and that's your personality. It's really helpful for the people that you're working with, the artists and those teens. So your parents did a really good job.
Thank you.
So one last question, and that is, in your ideal world, a year from now, what does the NXTHVN community look like?
It's so funny because, time is like such an abstract concept for me today. But, I think that, so I'm going to be as direct as I can. I think, in an ideal world, in a year from now, like COVID-19 has receded without claiming, too many more lives. NXTHVN has played a role in restoring some of the intimacies that have been lost during this time. So just thinking about how we reopen our doors, believing that we're going to, and then thinking about how and who is invited to help kind of rebuild the culture. And so I think, those things feel important to say up front. I think in general, people are going to be looking to cultural institutions for in-person experiences. And I think, part of it is like how we as a species, as a social species, how we undo some of the trauma of like being self-isolated and quarantined for however long this goes on. And so, yeah, I think for NXTHVN, it's like, it feels like our responsibility to take what has been essentially a private program, right? So our fellowship and our apprenticeship, we have open studios, we have exhibitions, but in terms of who we serve most readily, it's, you know, the 18 artists and apprentices that are here and curators. And so I think, yeah, in a year from now, we've developed like a more public face. So all of our workshops are not just available for the fellows online, they're available for the general public. The virtual programming that we've developed, you know, as a response to COVID for the exhibitions is not just in response to this moment, but is a way to remain more accessible as we grow and as we continue to build out both the space, but the program. And so I think that feels important. And then I think a year from now, we'll have our alumni network will have doubled. And so I think thinking about what they're up to in the world and how they're taking the lessons they've learned here and transforming their communities, building their own institutions, you know, writing the culture that they want to be a part of. I think that to me is really, really exciting. And yeah, I think that by then, hopefully there'll be enough of a momentum to really get folks here. Because I think that that's the other piece is, you know, while we're locally minded and we're really excited about what we're able to build in Dixwell and in New Haven, we're also excited about how we kind of factor into a national conversation. And so, yeah, my belief is that like in a year from now, more people will know about us and know about what we're trying to build and achieve, and they will want to come be a part of it in some way, whether or not that's, you know, as a participant in the fellowship or the Artists in Residence Live Work Tower, or just as a active community member. I'm excited to just see how we continue to grow and expand.
And I'm excited to watch, and I'm excited to be able to share this episode with everybody. And I want everybody to research and visit your website to see the wonderful work you do. And maybe a year from now, we'll have another episode and you'll give us an update.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
let's do that.
Sure. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Nico.
Thank you so much.
It's been great speaking with you. And take care. Be safe.
Yeah, you also. Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.